Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's hearing. Today we're going to hear from another witness from the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea. Yes, Mr.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, good morning. Good morning, members of the panel. I now call Miss Sue Redmond, please.
Thank you. Good morning, Miss Redmond.
Good morning.
Good morning. I understand you're going to affirm.
Yes.
The words should be there on the screen in front of you. Would you read them out, please?
I do solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you very much. Please sit down and make yourself comfortable. All right?
Yes.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Millett.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Ms. Redmond, good morning. Can I start by thanking you very much for coming to the inquiry and assisting us with our investigations? We're extremely grateful to you. We're going to take breaks during the course of your evidence, the morning and then the afternoon, but if you need a break at any other time, please just let us know and we can do that. If you have any difficulty understanding any of my questions, just say and I can put the question again or put it in a different way so that we can get your best evidence. One other thing, if you could please keep your voice up so that it's clear to the person sitting to your right who is typing away. She can get down everything you say on a nice clean transcript. Also, please don't nod or shake your head. You have to say yes or no, as the case may be. All right?
Yes.
All right. Now, you've provided two witness statements to the inquiry. I'm going to just show them to you and put them in formally. First, RBK 3035676, please. That should be the first page of your first statement of the inquiry of the 28th of January 2019. If we go to page 15 in it, please, there's a signature under the statement of truth and above the date. Is that your signature?
Yes.
Thank you. Your second statement is at RBK 3058120. Is that the first page of your second statement?
Yes.
Thank you. And if we go, please, to page 9, the foot of page 9, you can see under the statement of truth there, a signature above the date of the 9th of April 2020. Is that your signature?
Yes.
Have you read both of these statements recently?
I have.
Thank you. And can you confirm that their contents are true?
Yes.
Thank you. Now, I'm going to start some questions with questions about your background. Is it right that at the time of the Grenfell Tower fire on the 14th of June 2017, you held the role of Interim Executive Director for Adult Social Care, or ASC, and Public Health?
Yes.
And you took that role on, I think, in April 2017, and you held it until October 2017, yes?
Yes.
Why was that an interim role?
Because the previous director had left and they didn't have time to bring someone in straight away. So often interims come in just to hold the fort until they recruit to another director. And
I think you were part of the Tri-Borough agreement, yes?
Yes.
You'd returned to the Tri-Borough agreement to complete the project, which included dissolving the Tri-Borough initiative, which involved LBHF, London Borough of Hammersmith and Fulham, because it wanted to get out of it.
Yes.
Is that right? Yes. And can you tell us in brief what the Tri-Borough agreement was?
Yes. In certain services, like children's services, adult services in particular, and public health, the three London boroughs of Hammersmith and Fulham, Westminster and Kensington and Chelsea, they combined those services together. So they had one director over the three. Well, they had one executive director over the three councils for adult social care, for instance, instead of one in each. And each of those councils then had their own individual director who reported to the exec director. The idea being they could share staff, they would save money on sharing staff, but also they could combine how they worked and share good practice.
Yes. And can you confirm for us that adult social care moved from being a single borough service to a tri-borough service in 2012?
Yes.
Yes. And I think it's right that you were employed by Hammersmith and Fulham, LBHF, but your responsibility, is this right, was for adult social care for all three councils?
Yes.
Yes. Now, in your first statement at paragraph 9, you tell us that you had 3 directors, one from each council, who reported directly to you. Is that right?
Yes.
And is it right that they each had an operational lead role, and Stella Bailey was the director with responsibility for RBKC, yes?
Yes.
She was, I think, is this right, employed by RBKC?
She was.
Yes. And I think within RBKC, is this right, she was the director for integrated care, but for all 3 boroughs?
Yes.
And I think that's from 2015, as you tell us. Yes? Well, Bailey tells us that in her statement, but does that accord with your recollection?
Yes.
And adult social care, is this right? It provided residential and community-based care for the elderly, ill, disabled and vulnerable persons, yes?
That's right.
In relation to those residents coming under its remit, is this right, that would be ordinarily any resident with mental health problems or learning disabilities or challenges, the elderly and people with dementia or other vulnerable adult difficulties?
Yes.
Yes. How many people worked in the ASC department when you were there?
I'm not sure exactly, but there's probably about 1,000 people, I think.
Yes. And you say, I think you say that it was 1,000 RBKC staff. Is that right?
Oh, no, I think I probably meant Tri-Borough.
Tri-Borough. And in 2017, to whom did you report in your role as interim executive director?
Initially, I reported to the Hammersmith and Fulham chief exec.
That was Nigel Pallis, I think.
Yes.
Yes. And he was the lead CEO for the Tri-Borough, was he?
For adult social care, well, he was. They appointed the director, so he was the one I reported to.
Very well. And did you also report to Charlie Parker, who was the CEO at Westminster?
Yes, I had to go and report to both, and also Nicholas as well.
And Nicholas Holgate at RBKC, yes. Now, before the fire on the night of the 14th of June 2017, how much contact did you yourself have in that role with Nicholas Holgate at RBKC?
I really think I just was introduced. I don't think I'd been to a management meeting because I wasn't going to the management meeting. So I hadn't had any contact with hardly anyone in RBKC management team or Nicholas much, just to say hello, I think.
Right. Now, I want to ask you some questions next about your experience of dealing with civil emergency responses and crisis management. In your first statement, if we can turn to that, please, at page 2, paragraph 6, you tell us that your background qualification was as a social worker and I'm summarising here, that you'd worked in senior positions in local government for a number of years. Is that right?
Yes.
And I think that included working as an assistant director of adult social care at Wandsworth Council before working at Wiltshire County Council as corporate director for some 6 years before you retired from there in 2015. Is that right?
2013.
2013. That's right. Yes. Now, did those roles at Wandsworth and Wiltshire provide you with civil emergency or crisis management training?
They both provided me with management training, desktop exercises in the command structure,
yes.
Basically, yes.
And did you learn about a leadership role which had or involved training in multiple agency responses involving the gold, silver and bronze levels?
Yes.
And I think you participated, as you tell us, in a simulation exercise while you were at Wiltshire, not on the scale of Grenfell, but basically a desk exercise.
Yes, it was a half a day exercise with partners.
I see. Now, when you retired from Wiltshire in 2013, you tell us in your first statement that you undertook temporary director roles, including 6 months in 2013 as interim director of adult social care, employed by LBHF in the same Tri-Borough position we've already discussed. Is that correct?
Yes.
And just help me here. Between the end of your first stint at LBHF in October 2013 and your return there in April 2017, did you undertake any similar interim director roles?
I did. I was a similar role in Kingston for 2 years, and then a similar role in Cheshire.
Kingston and Cheshire. Now, when you returned to the Tri-Borough in April 2017 as interim executive director for adult social care and public health, did you receive any guidance or any information on the contingency management plan from LBHF or RBKC?
No.
None. So you didn't see, is this right, RBKC's contingency management plan at that stage?
I didn't.
Were you aware that it existed?
Only insofar as I knew councils had to have a contingency plan. And in each of my other interims, I was never inducted or given any information about them either.
Right. Were you aware, when you came back in April 2017, that the contingency management plan was a joint plan between RBKC and LBHF?
No.
You weren't? Right. So was that the same as your experience at your previous roles at Wandsworth and Wiltshire?
Well, they all had their own plans.
Right. Did you see, when you were at Wandsworth and then Wiltshire, did you see those plans?
I would have, because I was corporate director, I would have probably seen them at management meetings, and certainly on the training, we would have gone through the structures.
And what was your understanding in June 2017 of the role of adult social care in the event of an emergency which engaged either LBHF's or RBKC's contingency management plans?
Well, my understanding at the time from all my other roles was the role of adult social care is to look after the people that are known to them. So first of all, you make sure you look at your databases and you make sure people who've got care needs are being looked after. You also support hospitals, so you often maybe try to help people be discharged home quicker than they might have been, so you can free up a hospital. You also look at the surrounding areas and make sure home care and all the services are going to be able to be delivered. It's specifically around those vulnerable adults that are in your service, and also you have a rota already set up to staff rest centres with social workers.
And in your role as interim director, executive director of adult social care, did anybody at RBKC or indeed LBHF provide emergency response training to you?
No.
Do they discuss emergency response training with you at any induction when you came back to the Tri-Borough in April 2017?
No.
Had you received any training during your first time in the role back in 2013?
No.
Before the Grenfell Tower fire in June 2017, had you ever had an operational role as a director of adult social care during an emergency response?
No.
Now, we know that during the response to the Grenfell Tower fire, you were given the role of Humanitarian Assistance Lead Officer, also known as the HALO. That's correct, isn't it?
Yes, I did have that role.
Yes. What was your knowledge at that time of what that role involved? I say at that time, at the moment you took it on.
I actually took the role on later on the day of the 14th, I think.
Yes.
And by that time, I had advice from Tony Andrews from Westminster about what the role was. And I actually took it on. I actually then wrote to Nicholas Holgate and said, I've got advice, I can do this role. Before that, I didn't have any idea what the role was. And I think that both Stella, who had the role initially, and myself, just thought it was about rotas for rest centres, it was doing the normal things that adult social care directors do.
Right. Now, we'll come to the humanitarian assistance framework later in your evidence, but in relation to the role of HALO, were you aware when you took it on of what it meant, or how it was defined?
I knew, because I'd read the guidance that night, that it was to coordinate multi-agency responses, a few, not in terms of the emergency, but in terms of longer-term support.
Let's look at the framework for the moment, briefly. RBK 3011313, please. I'll show you page 1, and then we can look at page 2. There's the first page, and this is the version 5.0 as at April 2017. And if we go to page 2, please, you can see the second entry down. Humanitarian Assistance Lead Officer, HALO. The HALO will be appointed by local authority Gold and will typically be a director with responsibility for adult social care. The HALO will bring together partners including health, the police and voluntary and faith sectors to oversee the humanitarian assistance effort. They form the Humanitarian Assistance Steering Group, HASG. So did you understand at the time that it was a role where you, as the holder being appointed, required knowledge of the specific council emergency plans for each borough, as well as the wider London Resilience Humanitarian Assistance Framework?
No, I didn't understand that.
You didn't? Right. Were you familiar with this definition when you took the role on?
Well, this definition was sent to me. I read it in the evening of the 14th.
Right, okay.
And I read that to be, from where I was sitting at the time, by myself, without anyone supporting me, to be a coordination role. So I thought I could coordinate a meeting, basically.
And did you consider whether your previous training or your experience prepared you in any way for this role?
Mostly I considered that the fact that I didn't know anyone in RBKC, that I wouldn't be the right person for this role.
Right. Did you make that clear to RBKC or Tony Andrews?
Tony didn't work for RBKC. Tony was a Westminster Borough, and he was sending me the first time I got something from him. It was to say, just to let you know, this is a framework in case you need it.
Right.
And I didn't really take cognizance of how serious to read this huge document whenever I got it at 3:00 in that afternoon.
Did it surprise you at the time that there was no person more readily available who was familiar with this document already and had some training on it?
It surprised me, not particularly maybe that, because I didn't know no one had had any training on it, but it surprised me that no one else stepped up to do this role. Right.
So you had is this right, to be colloquial about it, you had a why me moment?
Yes.
Yes. Let's turn to the events of the 14th of June then. Can you recall when you first became aware of the fire at Grenfell Tower?
I think it was very early in the morning, and Stuart rang me.
Right.
6-ish.
Were you aware at that time that the RBKC contingency management plan had been activated?
No.
What did you consider at that stage that you, particularly the Adult Social Care Department, was required to do?
Anne Stewart worked for Hammersmith and Fulham, and so first of all, I was surprised she was ringing me, but she was the emergency duty person on duty that night. So I knew that we had to. I didn't know. She said there was a fire and you need to come in. Well, she said, I'm going through the database. So I knew, as I said before, the sort of things adult social care had to do in terms of looking after our own people who might have been affected.
She told you she was going through the database. Which database was that? Was that your Tri-Borough ASC database?
Yes.
I see. And did that have details of those people who received those services and where they lived?
Yes.
I see. And in relation to that database, how up-to-date was it, or should it have been, in accordance with the usual processes adopted?
I can only think it was very up-to-date. They're usually very up-to-date in terms of people we know.
Right. We may come back to this later in your evidence, but since we're on it now, let me just ask you, who was it in RBKC upon whom you relied to keep that database up to date?
Well, Stella was the director of RBKC. So
Stella Bailey. Do you know what steps Stella Bailey took vis-à-vis the TMO, RBKC's TMO, to keep her information about vulnerable persons in RBKC up to date?
I don't know. I'm struggling with the connection between the TMO.
Right.
She would have known who. We would have had addresses of everyone known to adult social care. They would have been in the adult social care database.
Right.
I don't know what contact she had with the TMO about how to support them at times of emergencies.
Right. Let me ask it slightly differently then. To what extent was there any communication or a conduit for information between the Tri-Borough ASC database on the one hand and RBKC's housing department on the other?
I have no knowledge.
You don't know. All right. Now, If we go to your first statement, please, page 4, paragraph 17 and 18, you say at the end of paragraph 17, having been called at about 6 a.m., that you made your way to the Beck at the town hall to offer any assistance and find out what was required. Do you remember what time you arrived at the Beck?
I don't, but it was very early. But I can't remember what exact time.
Right. How would you describe what you observed when you arrived?
Well, it was a small room with no windows. It had 3 televisions on, and that's the first time I saw Grenfell Tower. And there were quite a few people in there.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. And were you aware at that time, or did you learn who was Council Silver and in charge of the Beck?
No. I didn't know who was in charge of the Beck.
Did you speak to anybody to find out what was required of you?
Yes, well, I knew what straight away. There was myself there as adult social care, and there was children's services, and there was Anne Stewart. And between children and adults, we were looking at our own staff. We were making plans about hospital discharges. We were making plans about rotas of social workers. That's what we were doing at that time. And we were both sections. It was quite siloed. We were just getting on with that in terms of adult social care.
Was Anne Stewart there?
Yes.
Or working remotely? She was in the Beck?
She was there.
Right. And do you know what time she arrived? Do you know?
Well, she was the emergency duty officer. I think she must have got there about 6 or
Right.
before that.
Now, when you were going through the ASC database, did the search parameters that you were using, do you know, include those residents in the surrounding areas? In other words, not just Grenfell Tower, but those in the surrounding blocks, the walkways?
As far as I can remember, I think just at that time it was Grenfell Tower. I think later on people started looking at surrounding areas, but at that time I think it was just Grenfell.
Can you recall when ASC became aware of the need to consider those in the surrounding areas, the walkways?
I can't remember when.
Or Treadgold House, no?
They would, I can't remember when.
Do you know what was done in relation to those who were identified on the ASC database?
Yes, their social workers were contacted. All these people were known to the council, so they had social workers or they had some support worker, and all those support workers or social workers were contacted and asked to see if they could contact either people or their next of kin, and to see if they could see if they were located, that they were safe, and to ring back.
Was there any specific action in relation to identifying those who may have been sent to hospital?
Social workers were sent to hospitals as well, both to be there to support people when they got there, but also, as I said before, to help hospitals discharge existing patients. So we did send social workers to hospital. Now,
the earliest record we have in the inquiry's documents is that a social worker went to a hospital at 8:30 a.m. And we get that from, this is for our records, a spreadsheet at RBK30287113 row 19, column E. Don't worry about me showing it to you. Does that accord with your recollection?
It would probably be the right timing, because,
right.
Yeah.
Right. Now, in your statement, if we go to paragraph 22, please, we just move down to paragraph 22 on page 6, you say there, page 5, you say, at around 9:30 on 14th of June, I tasked Stella Bailey with setting up a rest centre rota for social workers to ensure that there were social workers providing support at the rest centres. Stella was the director of the ASC team at RBKC and had been in post for many years and was hugely experienced. A request for volunteers was made so that we could provide the required number of social workers at each of the 3 main rest centres on a rota basis and ensure they were staffed properly on a continuous basis. To whom was that support to be directed?
At that time, it was there was a generic call for support to go to rest centres. It wasn't specific about which rest centres.
Right.
After that, though, they were allocated to different rest centres.
Now, what I really mean is, was the support to be given or directed to those who had escaped from the tower, or was it family members seeking information?
That support was for the rest centres specifically, whoever was there.
I see. Do you know why it took until 9:30 a.m. to set that rota up, or to request that rota be set up?
I think 9:30 was. Before that, as I was saying, Anne Stewart she did have a rota of people who were ready to go, and there were some people already ready to go. And I think we were waiting to be told when to send them.
Right. I see. And can you say when social workers from the ASC were actually deployed to rest centres?
I think it must have been around. I think at 9:30 must have been the time we knew what rest centres to go to, and there was a decision made that we should send people out. We couldn't just send them without some instructions and some coordination. So I think it was about that time. It might have been 10 o'clock.
Right.
10 o'clock.
So are you saying that you didn't know which rest centres were operating to which social workers should be sent until about 9:30?
No, people did know rest centres, but and there was a rota. We already had the rota. But I'm trying to remember that I think officially we said we need someone to go to this and this and this specific rest centres at that time.
Right, I see. So you already had the rest centres, you already knew which they were. You just hadn't worked the rota out until 9:30.
Well, there was a list of a lot of places that people were going to. So in terms of which specific rest centres to send people to, I think we needed to know from someone in the Beck or somewhere where they would best be sent.
Right. To the best of your recollection, was the Beck clear with you at all times about which rest centres were operating?
It's only in retrospect that I really understood what the Beck was supposed to be doing, because at that time and that day, I didn't get any sense of anyone coordinating what was happening, certainly from my perspective in there. So I think someone told us around 9:30 which rest centres to go to.
Right. But before that, was there any discussion that you were either involved with or heard about which rest centres were operating?
I heard that there was lots going on, and I just heard lots of names mentioned.
Right, I see. But right.
Lots of rest centre names mentioned, or lots of accommodation names mentioned.
Yes. You said a moment ago in one of your answers that you weren't sure what the Beck was or what it was supposed to do. Can we take it from that you'd never had any training about what a Beck was, who was supposed to be running it, and what your role as a halo would be and how it would fit?
No.
Right. So you were essentially learning on the job, were you?
Yes. I knew, in terms of the training I'd had before on gold, silver and bronze, they were talking about first responders and second responders. So I can't remember anything about a Beck. My training was like 2010.
And was there sufficient capacity available to you to provide social workers on the rota to the three main rest centres that you refer to?
Well, I think initially, we did have enough social workers that we thought would be enough. And obviously, very quickly, it was realised there's going to have to be a rota throughout the day and the next day. And I think then we were really looking for volunteers.
And where were you looking for those volunteers?
Only at that time, it was across RBKC and Westminster and Hammersmith and Fulham. It was asking any social workers to join a rota. Right.
I'd like then to turn next to the RBKC Management Board meeting at 11 a.m. on the 14th of June, which has been referred to as RBKC Gold, and meetings of RBKC Gold. If we go, please, to paragraph 23, just a little bit lower down your screen, you deal with that board meeting in paragraph 23 there. And you say, my predecessor did not attend the management board meetings at RBKC. She would attend the Westminster City Council ones only. So I was not scheduled to attend that meeting, and Stella would attend. However, I was copied into an email from Nicholas Holgate, Chief Executive at RBKC, informing us that in light of the tragic events at Grenfell Tower, the scheduled meeting would take place as a gold meeting. Stella Bailey said she was happy to continue to attend the meeting as normal on the basis that she knew the management that would be attending. This made complete sense to me. This was a crisis, and the presence of a stranger, albeit the interim executive director, was not, in my opinion, going to assist. Now, is it right that the meeting was a scheduled meeting, but it was then converted into an RBKC Gold meeting in light of the events unfolding that morning?
Yes.
Yes. And bearing in mind that you were already in the town hall, did you consider at the time that you should have attended in light of the seriousness of the incident?
I was in the Beck with Anne, and Stella was the very experienced director. And I just said, well, you go to... Well, she said, I'm going to the first one. I didn't consider that I should go. I wasn't invited to the management meeting. It wasn't part of the management meeting. I didn't think at that moment I should go.
Right. Was there, even in retrospect, any skill set or set of experiences that you could have brought to that meeting which she didn't?
I can't think of any.
No. Let's then look at the minutes of that meeting. RBK 401095, page 1 to start with, to show you the first page of it and the attendees. There it is, 11 a.m. at Kensington Town Hall, action sheet, and you can see who was present and in attendance. And we can see apologies for absence, Sue Redmond. It's not a matter for you just to apologise or explain the apology, but I think, is it right, you weren't scheduled to be there anyway?
No. Yes, sorry, it's right, yeah.
Yes. And now if we go to page 2, we can see the update from CC and SB, the latter of which is Stella Bailey, SB, and that includes the fact that ASC have, and as it says, third bullet point down, pulled together a list of known residents accessing a number of council services but do not know where they all are currently. And then it goes on in the next bullet point. The Crisis Centre are on standby to offer help to mental health service users. There are a number of over 65s and the enabling team are on site. What was the Crisis Centre?
This is a specific service to RBKC, which I don't know about, but I think it's the joint service with the health service and the social workers who are mental health service, and I don't actually know who they are.
Right. Can you help us? What was the enabling team? Do you know?
I don't know who the enabling team are.
I mean, you weren't at this meeting, to be fair. So there may be a limit to how much you can help with it. But if we go to page 4, it refers in the 5th bullet point down there. Fourth bullet point down there, it says, looking to set up a humanitarian assistance group, which will continue to look at the welfare of the residents once the immediate crisis is over. TR to seek advice from an expert in Harrow Council on this. SB said she was happy to take lead on this until Friday and would find a deputy to take over. Did you know at that time what a humanitarian assistance steering group entailed?
No.
Now, you mention in your statement at paragraph 25, as we've seen over the page, that it had been said that Stella would take the lead on that, but because she was due to go on leave, you were given the role. Do you remember when it was decided that you would become what is known as a HALO, a Humanitarian Assistance Lead Officer?
No, not specifically, because it was sort of organic in a way, and I actually, at the end, said, I'll do it. So when Stella said this, when I read it again, I was really surprised because I think this wasn't mentioned throughout the day that a humanitarian assistance group would be looked at again.
Right.
That was the only reference I've seen to it. Stella didn't come back to me and said she was going to lead, she was going to be a halo. I think her response was the same as mine, what we knew adult social care could do. I can't say any more. But no one came back. No one spoke about a humanitarian assistance group for the rest of the day.
Right. And I think, as you told us earlier, you had a why me moment. Just to pick that up in your statement, if we can go, please, to your second statement at RBK 30588120, page 3, paragraph 3.3, you say there in the second sentence, when I was designated the role of Halo on 14th of June 2017, I did question whether I was the right person for the role, as I was relatively new to the borough and did not know too many people, nor have all the contact details of those, both internally within RBKC and external agencies that could provide assistance. I accepted the role, explaining that I would need further support, and I did receive a lot of support from Tony Andrews, Westminster City Council. When you accepted the role, did you, as you say you did, you questioned whether you were the right person for the role. Did you articulate that question to Tony Andrews or anybody else?
Yes, I know I had conversations, and I've seen emails that I've sent to say some expert is coming in after me raising this. So I spoke to quite a few people.
But you nonetheless took on the role.
Well, if I could just explain a little bit then. That afternoon, Stella said she was going on leave, so I said I would step in terms of her role, not knowing what that role was at that time.
Right.
And then Tony Andrews from Westminster City Council sent me the framework, and then in the evening he sent me specifics about what the role is and what they do. After that, no one actually said to me, "You are the Halo." At that evening, I mean, I'm probably going too far, I can come back to you. So no one actually said to me, "Will you be the Halo?"
Right.
It wasn't actually agreed formally till the next day.
I see. Now then, let's just stick with the 14th of June for the moment. If we go back to your first sentence, your first paragraph, I'm so sorry, your first statement, please, at RBK 3035676, page 6, paragraph 27 at the foot of the page, you say, an ASC Heads of Service meeting was held at around 1400 hours on 14th of June. You see that? And then if we go to your second statement, please, page 4, paragraph 5.2, you tell us a little bit more about that meeting. And you say it was led by Stella Bailey to update, coordinate and ensure all people known to social care were receiving care still, and that hospitals could be supported and people moved out to free up capacity. The meeting also discussed rotas and the provision of cover. The meeting was attended by the ASC managers from all 3 councils in order to support our BKC's small management team. I attended the meeting but arrived later, and I'm not shown on the list of attendees. Now, let's look then against that background in your statement at the draft minutes of that meeting. It's at RBKC 3058106. And I think you tell us that you don't believe that formal minutes were taken. These are drafts. And if you look at the email, if you go to the bottom of the email on page 1, where the note begins, you can see it says discussion, and the first bullet point or dash there says need a comms pulled together to advise staff what to say to clients. Was such a plan pulled together? Do you remember?
I can't remember a specific plan being pulled together, but certainly our social care staff hopefully were told what to say to clients.
Right.
And they were told, basically, they were saying, they were contacting their own clients who they'd known, and they were asking them, did they know where their next of kin was, or did they know things? So, it wasn't a comms plan, as in terms of the disaster or anything.
I see, so there wasn't one. There wasn't a comms plan per se.
No.
I see. And what was the advice given to staff about what they should say to their own clients?
Well, basically, we were asking them to see if, first of all, they could locate them. If not, they could locate the next of kin. And then they found out that they were safe. And then they could tell them where the rest centres were.
Now, if you look at the last point on page 1, it says, one of the ASC's focus is the humanitarian needs of those affected. We'll need to pull together a regular board, but in the meantime, we need to create a rota for cover at the 3 rest centres. Someone, if we go to the next page, top of the screen, someone will need to be awake and alert and not alone ideally we want 3 people per rest centre per shift. Now, in relation to pulling together a regular board there, what was that a reference to? Do you know?
I don't know. I think everyone was just concentrating on the rota for the rest centres.
Right. Did that, or was that board related to the Humanitarian Assistance Steering Group, or HASG, that then came to be set up?
I can only assume it must be.
Right. Or there was a possibility that I suppose a board might have been suggested and then superseded by the creation of a Humanitarian Assistance Steering Group. Can you help us?
I think this is indicative that people didn't really know what was what.
Right. Was there any discussion at this meeting, 2:00 on the 14th, of the Humanitarian Assistance Framework document or the need for a steering group?
No.
No. As you can see here, there's a reference to a need to create a rota for cover at the 3 rest centres, 3 people per rest centre per shift. And again, if you look at the same page lower down, there's a bullet point, 7 bullet points down, about 2/3 of the way down your screen, which says need people. Do you see it? Need people to volunteer? Yep. Need people to volunteer for tonight's rest centre shifts and to look into this. The volunteer rest centres haven't taken a list of who's there, so we can't cross-reference. So it's chaotic and confusing. We need the people at our rest centres to stay at our rest centres. Now two things about that. First, was staffing the rest centres and filling the rota a problem at the start of this response?
I think at the start, because they already had a rota of some people, those people were called straight away. But I think as it unfolded, there was a real need to get volunteers, and there was a concern about how many volunteers they needed.
Now, there's a reference here also to the taking of lists at rest centres. Can you explain, as you say, in what way it was chaotic and confusing?
I didn't say that. I think that was Anne Stewart.
Okay. The email says it.
All right.
Going back to that 7th bullet point in the middle of your screen, or 2/3 of the way down your screen, it says we can't cross-reference, so it's chaotic and confusing. Was that not a view you shared at the time?
I don't know whether I was there for the whole of that meeting, but it wasn't. Obviously, that's what Anne said. And I don't know whether I shared it or not, because I was in this, I wasn't really connected into what was happening at the rest centres.
Right. Do you know how it was known that the volunteer rest centres were not taking a list of those who were there? Was that being reported? You don't know.
I don't know how that was known.
Now, we know that a number of locations opened up spontaneously on the night of the fire as places of shelter, and RBKC then designated the locations that they would support, first the Harrow Club and then the Rugby Portobello Trust, and then a decision later to concentrate efforts on the Westway Centre. Is that your recollection of the official rest centres on the night?
Is the Harrow Club the same as the Clement James?
No.
Okay, well...
then no.
No.
Do you remember what the process was of registering those who had attended an official rest centre, so designated?
No.
Do you know whether the information of those or about those who did register was collated from the 3 rest centres that are mentioned here in the minutes?
Well, I only know in retrospect, having heard.
I see. All right. Well, even in retrospect, were they?
Sorry, were they?
Were they collated?
Well, sorry, I only know what I've heard in these hearings, and I know
All right.
they weren't collated.
Was it the case that a number of those displaced by the fire would move from rest centre to rest centre, looking for information regarding missing loved ones?
That's what I believe.
You believe so? And do you know how someone who would attend more than one rest centre would be recorded?
No.
No. And presumably you don't know how the numbers of those attending rest centres would be collated?
No.
Let's then turn to the next meeting, which was at 3 p.m, 1500 hours on the 14th of June, and that was an RBKC Gold meeting. You cover that at paragraph 26 of your first statement on page 6, if we can go to that, please. Page 6, paragraph 26. It's up on the screen. You say, Stella Bailey and I both attended the 1500 hours gold meeting. I think this was on the basis that I became aware that Stella was due to go on annual leave on the Friday after work. Therefore, it was sensible that I was involved for continuity and to understand the issues at the time. Attending the meeting, what was your impression of what was happening? What was your impression of the meeting?
On one hand, there were reports from people saying, I'm trying to think of specifics. They were saying some things hadn't worked, like senior managers at rest centres, but they were there now. So on the one hand, there was a sense that people were doing things that should be right. On the other hand, I just got a sense of people being shocked, and it wasn't a tactical meeting as such.
Right.
It was a meeting that was different for people. They were updating things, and there was lots going on. There's lots of information there, and very hard to then work out who was accountable and responsible for what.
Did you form any view about whether RBKC had a clear strategy and sufficient resources to deal with the aftermath of this fire?
At that time, as I say, there was it felt like a reassurance from people. Senior managers are there now, we've got the rotas, we've got this, everyone was saying their individual things. So in that respect, it seemed as though people were doing things. Obviously, I know that wasn't the case at all, but I didn't get the sense that there was there was urgency on some things, but there wasn't a real sense of, and there was lots of managers in the room, and I didn't know why some of them weren't out there or
Right.
doing other things. There was lots of us in the room.
So just trying to, and I don't want to paraphrase that answer, but would it be right to say, and correct me if this is wrong, but your impression was that although there was plenty of activity, it wasn't coordinated or structured and following a particular plan?
I didn't get a sense that it was following a plan.
Did you get a feeling, or did you get did you form a view about whether RBKC had sufficient resources to do what they were trying to do?
I didn't have any idea then, because for me, because I didn't know those people, I was hearing senior managers are there, we're doing this, we've got this. I knew we were struggling with some social workers, but we had a rota for the next day.
Let's go to the minutes. RBK 402282. And you can see there, 3 p.m, Kensington Town Hall action sheet, and you can see who was in attendance. Stella Bailey is identified there, as are you. Also in attendance, Robert Black, as you can see, he was from the TMO. And if you look at, under the heading Grenfell Tower Fire, fourth bullet point down, it says TR, who was Tony Redpath, reported the Beck were finding out about the numbers of people in the rest centres and what practical assistance they needed, consideration to be given on how the donations can be transported to the rest centres once a sense of demand was ascertained. Was there clarity, any clarity, about the amount of people affected at that stage?
I don't think there was.
Was there any mention, any discussion of any problem about obtaining an accurate understanding of the numbers affected adversely and what practical assistance they needed?
I can't remember that there was any discussion.
There was. What was that? What was the upshot of that discussion?
Oh, sorry, I can't remember that there was.
You can't remember that there was?
No.
I'm sorry, I misheard you. Yes, I see. If we go then to the final entry on page 2 of the minutes, above agree to reconvene, it says in that last bullet point, TR to communicate with SR on which rest centres to keep open overnight. Did Tony Redpath communicate with you on that issue?
I can't specifically remember, but I think we agreed it would be the Westway that would open that night. And the reason he was communicating with me is make sure the social workers were there and supporting them.
Yes. Was it the case that you yourself wanted to go out to the rest centres, were being asked to remain because leadership was needed in the office?
I wanted to do something, yeah, and I did suggest I go on two separate occasions.
Who asked you to stay?
I can't remember, but I said, look, can I go out and do something? And they said, oh no, we need the adult social care, you need to stay here. I also asked on the Friday, we'd go to London as well, and I was told no.
Right. Let's then turn back to the time you took on the role of Halo. And as we've seen already, you took it on expressly, it seems, is this right, on the basis that you needed further support? Yes?
Yes.
Yes. Now, the support you received, again, is this correct, but was in the form of Tony Andrews, who was, I think, at that stage, the Emergency Planning Manager, Humanitarian Assistance at Westminster City Council.
Yes.
And you say in your first statement that he told you that as the interim executive director, it was your role, according to national protocol, to lead on humanitarian assistance. Yes? That's what you say in your statement, paragraph 29. We can see it if you like.
No, so I think at some point he told me that, but what he did initially was send us all in the adult social care framework document, to say you might want to have a read of this.
Right.
He was being very helpful.
And do you remember when he sent that document to you?
I know from records that he sent that email to us all about 2:00 on the 14th.
Yes. Right. And did you have the conversation with him when he told you it was your role to lead on national protocol?
Well, he sent me a document at 2:00. I don't know when I opened it.
Right.
And it was a framework. It was a huge framework document. And it was only later when I think I'd come out of goal meeting or something that I think I rang. We actually had a conversation about that role and what it is and who's supposed to do it. And that's when I then went to people in RBKC and said, could someone else, do you want me to do it? You know, I wanted to do something, but I actually didn't think maybe I was the right person to do it.
And who did you tell at RBKC?
I can't remember, but I think it might have been Tony Redpath. I can't remember. I spoke to a few. I might have also spoken to Nicholas, because after that, then came a discussion about some expert will be coming tomorrow to take on the Halo role.
You see, I might have spoken to Nicholas. Is that Nicholas Holgate?
Yes.
And was he in the Beck? Where were you when? Sorry, let me try this. Where were you when you had that conversation with him?
I have no idea.
Right. Was it face to face or was it on the telephone?
It would have been face to face.
Right. Somewhere in Kensington Town Hall.
Yeah.
Right. Now, let's go to RBK 3019928. This is an email from Tony Andrews on the 14th of June 2017, timed at 2024 in the evening, to you. Subject: Humanitarian Assistance Steering Group Suggestion. Attachments: Grenfell Tower HASG Suggestion. Sue, here are some thoughts for your first meeting. For what it's worth, your role according to the London Humanitarian Assistance Framework is Humanitarian Assistance Lead Officer, HALO. You may like to put my 24/7 contact numbers below on your phone. Now, before that point, had you heard of HALO?
If I had it, it'd only been when I read the document.
Right. And had you already received the document, the framework, from Tony Andrews before this point?
Yes, he'd sent the framework about 2:00 on the Friday. This was more specifics. He was actually giving me some specifics and a bit more detail.
Yes. Now, well, it's attached to this email that we see a document called Humanitarian Assistance Steering Group. Let's just look at that because we can see what's attached. RBK 3019929, and it has that very title. And it says in the first paragraph, the HASG sits under the Local Authority Recovery Group, which is typically chaired by the Chief Exec, to coordinate all recovery issues, community reassurance, built environment issues, community cohesion, business continuity issues, etc. You may get the HASG started before the recovery group starts. The HASG is a multi-agency group typically chaired by the Director of Adult Social Care, who has lead responsibility for humanitarian assistance under the Civil Contingency Act 2004. The purpose is to lead, oversee and coordinate all aspects of the humanitarian response. In this incident, that is likely to include, and then you can see a long, long list of numbered roles and functions. Do you see that?
Yes.
Now, just pausing there. When you got this document, did you look at the framework document that you had been sent earlier in the day to see how your role fitted into this?
Yes.
You did. And if we look at the third paragraph on page 1 and then all the numbers, you would agree, I think, that these are a significant number of areas for you to oversee as HALO, yes?
Yes.
Yes. And one of those, if we go to point... Oops, we've lost the document. Can we go back to the document, please? RBK 301999. The second item down, point 2, says rest centres and other immediate needs. The HASG probably only needs brief assurance from the person coordinating rest centres that the following are being taken care of and may only need a more detailed discussion if there are problems needing higher level resolution, e.g. more substantial mutual aid from other local authorities and partners. On the 14th and into the 15th, who did you consider was the person coordinating the rest centres?
Well, I actually had one person's name, but I don't think she was. I know Gold were coordinating. They were doing discussions at Gold. There was a woman called Sue Harris who I found was out there reporting back. I thought she was managing the rest centres. I think I'm mistaken about that now. But at the time, I thought it might have been her.
Why do you think you're mistaken?
Because, well, I don't know, actually.
Right. So is the answer you don't know?
Yes, I don't know who was coordinating.
Right. And did you have any idea about what the BRC, the British Red Cross, were doing and what their role was at that time?
I don't think I had any detailed idea of what they were doing at that time. I very soon did, but no, I didn't.
You say you very soon did. When? When did you very soon do?
Well, the next morning.
Right. And when you did come to understand it, did you understand their role to be?
The council was. I think I did ask some questions. The council said that, the British Red Cross go in first. They coordinate our rest centres for us, and they communicate with people.
Right.
When I spoke to the British Red Cross, their view wasn't quite the same.
Right. We may come back to that later in your evidence, but just while we're on it, who was it who told you, who at the council told you that the British Red Cross go in first, they coordinate our rest centres and communicate with people?
Oh, so many people. It might have been Stuart Priestley or Tony Redpath.
Right. Now, can we go back to the email chain in the evening of the 14th of June between you and Tony Andrews? You responded to his email, and we can see that at RBK 3058103. And this refers or captures what you've just told us about your conversation with Nicholas Holgate. It's from you to Tony Andrews at 21:15 on the 14th of June. Thanks so much, Tony. And then you give your number. And then in the next line, it says, Nicholas just told me that some expert is going to come to help on this front from London councils, so I will find out tomorrow if I'm the HALO or not. But in the meantime, I've read some of your framework, thanks, and we'll read this. And I will catch up with you even on phone tomorrow when I know. Now, I'm taking it that Nicholas there is Nicholas Holgate, yes?
Yes.
Now, do you remember who the expert from London councils, or perhaps London Resilience, was to be at that stage?
No. I mean, I don't know, rather than I don't remember. I don't know.
Right, you don't know. Given that you felt that, as you say, somebody else could or perhaps should have occupied the role of HALO the following day, did the lack of information delay the setting up of the Humanitarian Assistance Steering Group on the 14th of June?
Well, on the 14th of June, 8 o'clock at night when I'm getting the information about what a halo is. And it didn't stop me setting it up first thing in the morning, because I went in at 8 o'clock and did all the business for it, even before I knew whether I was doing it or not. So I didn't know what else I could do then.
Right. Now, I think you had email contact with Nicholas Holgate that same evening at a run about the same time. In fact, the next thing you did, because if we look at RBK30's 19951, we can see you sent him an email 6 minutes after sending this back to Tony Andrews, and you say, and this is at 21, and you say to him, Nicholas, I hope you're okay. Just to let you know, I have good support and advice about setting up the Humanitarian Assistance Board ASAP. I'm happy to start this tomorrow, but we'll await our meeting with you in the morning. And of course, if we have the expert from London councils, we can agree who does what and take it from there. Just wanted to give you some reassurance. Why did you think he needed reassurance?
I think, and I remember this, I think it wasn't really that. I had, by that time, that afternoon, seen lack of coordination, and I'd spoken to Tony Redbath and Stuart Priestley about that.
Right.
And I said, you need to get structured, you need to get sorted. And then when I read this, I felt that if I just came in, as one people didn't know, setting up this humanitarian assistance steering group, that there's no way it would have been in any structure. I thought we were in danger of setting something up to duplicate everything else and everyone running around doing the same thing, which had been happening. So this email was actually I think I also sent the actual advice I got from Tony to actually say what it was. I was actually saying, this is what this is. It's a serious group. I'm happy to start it, just so you know. And it was really saying, I need this to be part of a structure. I should have been more explicit, but that's what I was actually saying.
Right.
And this is me saying I'll do it, because I wasn't actually. No one's in the meantime told me to do it or set it up.
Right. Now, I think you do say in your statement, at paragraph 7.7 of your second statement, that you got a response from Mr. Holgate to your email. A few minutes later, let's go to that. RBK30's 58107. This is an email sent by him back to you 4 minutes later, 21:25. And he says, Sue, thanks. If you want to take some steps before 10 a.m., please do. Up to you. What did you make of that response?
With everything I know, and at that time I just thought it's up to me to do whatever I wanted.
Right. So you didn't. I see. Did you take that email as essentially the go-ahead to take on the role of Halo and set up the age?
Oh, no, what I took that was, it's up to you to do what you want. So I actually did meet at 8 o'clock and start doing everything.
Right. Do you consider that the HASG could have been set up on the 14th rather than on the morning of the 15th?
I do. I do.
You do. And looking back on it now, do you think or do you agree that an HASG should have been set up on the 14th as opposed to the 15th?
Oh, yes, I do. And when I read the document, it was massive in terms of what that group does. But it did say it was like touch on rest centres. But of course, because what was happening in rest centres, that group became basically sorting out the issues in the rest centres.
Right. Who did you consider was leading on humanitarian issues on the 14th of June before the establishment of the HASG on the 15th, and indeed the confirmation of you as Halo?
Again, it was siloed. Adults were leading on adults. Children were leading on children, so they're humanitarian issues. Tony Redpath, I thought, was looking at Humanitarian Assistance Board. I thought he was the one who was dealing with that. Of course, in my ignorance and not knowing what the huge task of it was, I didn't realise he was doing all that.
Now, If we go to your first statement, please, page 7, paragraph 28. You say there, I stayed at the RBKC Town Hall the whole day and did not leave until after 2200 hours that evening. And that's the 14th of June, if we look at this paragraph in the context of your wider statement. And then you go on, I remained in Beck throughout the day and supported any actions which needed doing and asking Tony Redpath if he needed help coordinating anything. So was Tony Redpath your principal point of contact within the Beck during the 14th of June?
No, but he was a senior manager, director who was managing all of them. He wasn't in the Beck very often. But I had, by that time, rightly or wrongly, I'd start answering some phones in the Beck, and I could see that there was very little leadership. There was an amazing woman in there, Rebecca Blackburn, doing an amazing job. But I could sense that there were a lot of people, a lot of phones going, and there was a lot of people running around. And it didn't seem, I didn't know who was leading or what, so I went, and I remember asking Tony Redpath and Stuart Priestley to sit in a room with me. And I think I asked the Director of Children's to come with me.
Did you have a meeting?
Well, it wasn't a meeting, but it was like 10-minute conversation.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
During that conversation, did it become clear to you what the principal problems of the response were?
Well, I just said to both of them, you need to stop, you need to pause, you need to slow down, you need to get some structure. Everyone's running around like rabbits in the headlights. That's what I said. Please, users, we need to coordinate things. That's what I said.
What was it that appeared to you to be lacking in coordination at that point?
Leadership.
In what areas specifically?
Well, particularly in the Beck. And I've heard people say it was a loud environment, phones were going, it needs to be like that. Maybe people who are not used to it could be shocked. But I saw people duplicating they're asking questions about what's the phone number for this, what's the address for this, and there was 101 things going on. And adult social care and children's were separate, housing was separate. I just didn't get the sense that we were fitting into any sort of plan. And at the goal meeting, people were saying things are okay, and then in the Beck, it just felt so many questions were coming in about rest centres, and I just didn't get a sense of any plan at all or any structure. And so I was asking him, could you pause and they were running in and people were running in and out and running around, and people were talking together in groups and then running off. And so it didn't feel coordinated.
Right. Now, if we go to paragraph 30 of this statement a little bit lower down, you say this: in addition to the crisis response, I had to ensure that our resources were not being depleted to the point which would prevent the execution of ASC's day-to-day business elsewhere in the borough. Grenfell was absolutely a priority to be properly resourced, in addition to maintaining routine care. And looking ahead to the 15th of June, did you consider at that point that there were sufficient resources available to RBKC for it to meet the humanitarian needs of those affected, as well as its routine care commitments?
No.
And what gave you that impression?
Because they didn't have very many staff. They didn't have very many managers in adult social care in RBKC. And the main one they had went to the local office and was dealing with Grenfell. So there was hardly any other managers around.
Right.
And the purpose of that point was saying we had managers in Westminster and in Hammersmith and Fulham. And it was about that whole adult social care team trying to support.
Yes. Let's then turn to the 15th of June. And you refer in your statement to a meeting with Tony Andrews at 8 a.m. that morning. That's at paragraph 32. If we just turn the page, please, to page 8, where you set that out, and you say in the last sentence there, we were waiting for the go-ahead from Nicholas Holgate. So I take it that you still hadn't heard back from him by 8 a.m. on the morning of the 15th.
No, and I don't think I actually ever heard anything. It was just then in the goal meeting at whenever it was, 10, that it was announced.
No, we'll come to that. Do you remember having a conversation at any time that morning, or indeed later in the day on the 15th, with somebody called Mark Sawyer?
I definitely remember talking to Mark Sawyer. Yes, it must have been on the... Well, I met him, I think he was there on the 15th, yeah.
Did he provide any advice to you or share any thoughts with you at that time?
Oh, I can't remember. I know I said I don't know anyone. I think I might have said to him, I don't know people in RBKC, and I need some support. And I think he, for the next day, got in someone to take notes and something. I forget whether he actually spoke to me that day.
Right. I mean, you recall having a conversation with him on that day. Do you recall relaying to him your observations about what was happening in the Beck and the rabbit in headlights nature of the response that you had observed the previous day?
Actually, I suppose it's coming to me. I think I spoke to Mark Sawyer after a goal meeting, maybe in the afternoon. I think that's maybe when I spoke to him, because he was then introduced as someone who was from London Gold.
Right. Well, we'll come to that in due course. Can we start the day then, or the day's goals, 15th of June, 10 a.m. Let's go to the meeting note, RBK 3028807.
Before we go there, could I just ask, you say in your statement in the morning you had a meeting about 8 o'clock and started putting together the HASG, and then you say you were waiting for the go-ahead from Mr. Holgate. Hadn't you had that in that previous email?
Possibly, but so I was doing it. I mean, when I say I'm waiting for the go-ahead officially,
but hadn't he told you in the email to get on and do what you thought was appropriate?
He had. I suppose I was waiting to know if this person was coming in to do that role. It's about the role. I was getting on and doing the things that were needed to do.
Right. Thank you.
Let's just go, in the light of that, let's just go back to see how you understood the email. Can we go to RBK 3058107? This is Nicholas Holgate's email to you at 21:25, and you say to him in the third line in your email to him a few minutes before that, I'm happy to start this tomorrow, but we'll await our meeting with you in the morning. And his response is, thanks, if you want to take some steps before 10 a.m, please do, up to you. So did you understand his email to you as saying, here is formal confirmation of the setting up of the Humanitarian Assistance Steering Group in the morning, or did you read him as telling you that you could essentially take preparatory steps off your own bat, but that nonetheless formal confirmation would have to await the meeting?
I think I thought that, get on, you set up the meeting, but whether I was a halo or not, I think that's the thing that was still in doubt.
Right, I follow. Mr. Chairman, is that a convenient moment?
Yes.
We can then get into the meeting at 10 o'clock.
All right, yes, good, we can stop there.
Thoroughly.
Well, Mr. Evans, as you were told, we have a break during the morning, and this seems like a good time to have it. So we'll stop there. We'll resume, please, at 11:30. And on this and other occasions, when there are breaks in your evidence, please don't talk to anyone about your evidence while you're out of the room. All right?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Do go with the usher, please. Thank you. 11:30 then, please. Okay. Would you ask Mr. Redmond to come back in, please? Thank you. Right, Mr. Redmond, ready to carry on?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Yes, Mr. Miller?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let's turn then to the RBKC Gold Group meeting at 10 a.m. on the 15th of June 2017. The notes or minutes of that are at RBK 3028807. And we can see who attended. You included there, as you can see in the first chunk of names. Was it then that you were formally appointed as the council's halo?
I think, in my understanding, it was.
Right. And I think the first meeting of that group was at 2 p.m., 1400 hours, yes? Yes. Now, in your first statement, I don't think we need to go to it, in your first statement, page 8, paragraph 32, you say you had to wait for the go-ahead from Nicholas Holgate. We saw that already before the break. Did you get the go-ahead formally? Did he say to you, you are now the halo?
I can't remember that because I think I just said I've set up the meeting. Is there anything in these minutes? Does it say?
Yes, and let's turn to page 2. If you look at page 2 under other updates, bullet point 2, SR to act as the council's halo and lead on the humanitarian response, i.e. continuing to support residents evacuated from Grenfell and other households. Was that the go-ahead?
Yes.
Right. And did Mr. Holgate himself say that? Or was that
My recollection was he did. And when you say was it the go-ahead, I was already doing the prep. This was actually telling everyone else that was my role.
Now, staying with the minutes of the Gold Group meeting at 10 a.m., can we turn to page 3? And you can see at the foot of page 3 there, which is under the major heading of key issues and actions, there's something as a headline or wording in bold, reputational damage. You see that?
Yes.
And then underneath the first paragraph, there's a line that says SR and MF to nominate a key voluntary sector liaison officer. You see that?
Yes.
Now, what role was envisaged for that individual?
My recollection from this, I think I was given that task because I was going to set up the Humanitarian Assistance Group. So it was to go there and talk about it. I'm guessing that was the voluntary. Well, I'm trying to remember. One of the roles of Humanitarian Assistance Group is to make sure voluntary sector are part of that. And we needed someone who could actually go and talk to the voluntary sector. And I think, having tried to remember who that was then, the only person in the council who took any role in that was Tony Redpath, and he became that person.
And MF is Martin Fitzpatrick, I think, yes?
Yes.
Yes, and he was the RBKC's media communications team, I think, wasn't he? Do you remember that?
Yes.
Yes. Now, you say in your second statement at paragraph 13 on page 9, and again, no need to see it unless we want to, but that it was Tony Redpath who was appointed RBKC's voluntary sector lead shortly after this meeting. Do you remember that?
Yes, when we say appointed, I had to ask around who would be, who leads the voluntary sector, and he was. So I said, Tony, you'll have to come.
Did you have conversations with him at that stage about that role?
No.
You didn't? What was the nature of your discussions of any kind with Tony Redpath about engaging with the voluntary sector and the support that it was able to provide?
I don't know whether I had any conversations with him then about it, but I did have conversations with him about who was, which voluntary organisations were out there. Was he going? Did he have contacts with them? Where were there? Who was the people we should invite to the Humanitarian Assistance Group? And he said he'd go and sort out the reps to come to the group. My role was to get the reps to the group to have that discussion with them so they can be part of that response going forward.
You say reps. Who were the reps?
The representatives from the voluntary sector,
right,
who he knew, who could join the Humanitarian Assistance Group.
I follow. Now, within the voluntary sector, there's the Red Cross. I just want to go back to the Red Cross with you. If we go to your first statement, please, page 8, paragraph 33, you say there, I arrived at the Beck. I liaised with the Red Cross. This is after your arrival at the Beck on the 15th of June. I liaised with the Red Cross to make sure that they and the council were working together efficiently. Was it on the 15th of June that this liaison between you and the BRC occurred?
I think it was later in the day. It wasn't that early, but yes.
Right. What did you actually do?
Well, the Red Cross, I think it might have been after the Humanitarian Assistance Group first meeting, and I spoke after with the Red Cross to get their view on what was happening.
And what did they tell you?
They had a lot of concerns about many things. They did raise some at the Humanitarian Assistance Group, but they had concerns about how the council weren't visible and the managers weren't there.
Right. Who did you speak to? Do you remember?
I think it was Emma.
Emma Spragg. Right. And at that point, 15th of June, did you understand, or what did you understand the British Red Cross was doing?
Operationally, they were doing an awful lot of things on the ground in terms of supporting rest centres. They had volunteers out looking at donations. They were offering to be involved with everything. Strategically, Emma was wanting to get more strategic overview of the whole picture, including the impact, the numbers of people who are involved, and that whole impact assessment.
And what links did you understand they were having with council staff?
I didn't know what formal links they were having.
Right.
On the ground, they were speaking with people in the centres, but I don't know whether operationally, managerially, they had any links in with the council.
Right. And you say in your last answer but one that Emma Spragg was wanting to get more strategic overview of the whole picture. Did she tell you that?
Well, in terms of anyone coming to that Humanitarian Assistance Steering Group meeting with any experience and understanding all the things one had to do, including the impact assessment, the Red Cross and she were really helpful in helping me look at that overview. So I got a sense that they were following some sort of plan and understanding what should happen in crises, and I was wanting them to work with the council closely and helping them.
Did you think that it was the council's plan they were following or their own?
No, I think it was their own plan.
And what impression did you form, even if it was only an impression, about how well the BRC was integrating with RBKC staff and whether or not that was part of a holistic and organised strategy?
I think the Red Cross were desperate for that, but I don't think that was actually happening.
And did she tell you that? Or say anything to give you that impression?
I know I got the impression from things that were said. I can't exactly remember the conversations, and those conversations continued for a while after.
Right. And I think in general you found the BRC, British Red Cross, helpful during the whole of your time as a Halo.
Really, really helpful.
Yeah. Now, if we go to your second statement, please, page 7, paragraph 10.3, you say, at 11:42 on 15th of June 2017, I received a copy of the BRC's impact assessment. This had been sent into the Beck from Matt Hogan, London Resilience Manager, and you exhibit it. Did you read it at the time?
I can't actually remember whether I read it at the time. We certainly had it at the group meeting.
Right. Now, you said in the previous paragraph 10.2, that BRC provided information from staff working in the rest centres and with residents. Is that correct?
Sorry, what paragraph am I on?
10.2.
Oh, 10.2.
In the middle of your screen. Let me show you what you say. You say, I had regular telephone and face-to-face contact with the BRC, and they brought a lot of experience in a very calm manner, providing information from staff working in the rest centres and with residents, assisting with managing the rest centres, and always providing suggestions and new ideas. On the basis that that's correct, do you remember, were any key messages being fed back from the rest centres to you via the BRC?
Yeah, they were saying that there was people were very upset. Council staff weren't very visible. There didn't seem to be any. I can't remember. They were saying things like that. This was in the afternoon of the 15th.
Did you pass any of the messages that you were getting from the BRC on to anybody else at RBKC?
Yes, I know. It was really concerning what they were saying, and they didn't have any liaison in. Of course, there's an assumption here that this role is in charge of everything, and I was coordinating it. And when I heard those things, I went straight to Tony Redpath and said, "You need to talk to the British Red Cross. They've got really." And then you go to a goal meeting, you get told senior managers are going out and things are happening.
Right.
So yeah, I raised it with Tony Redpath.
At the time you took on, or after the time you took on the Halo role, to whom did you report at RBKC? Or to whom did you think you were supposed to report at RBKC in respect of the Halo role?
Into the goal meeting, I guess, but
right.
No.
But not to any particular individual?
No. I didn't have anyone in RBKC working with me. I had to ask for some support.
Turning to the operation of the Westway particularly, were you aware of the BRC operating a wristband system for residents and the bereaved so that they could come in?
Not specifically. I have heard about it, but
right.
At that time.
Were you aware at the time on that day of any problems that gave rise to?
Not on that day.
Later?
Only insofar I've heard some things in these hearings.
Were you aware of any problems about people from the walkway properties gaining access to the Westway?
Not at the time.
Can we then turn to the HASG meeting on the 15th of June, which you said would take place at 2 p.m. and indeed did? I think you chaired that group, didn't you, that group meeting?
Yes.
Do you know why it didn't take place until 2 p.m. that day?
I think, because I was trying to think about that, I think it was partly because there were so many other meetings, and I think there was a 10 o'clock gold, and then there was some other meeting with health colleagues, I think. And so I left the meeting to be arranged, and the earliest time I was told was 2 o'clock.
If we go to your first statement, please, at page 8. This is your second statement. We need to go back to your first statement, page 8, paragraph 37. I summarise what you say there. You say that the group was a multi-agency group which included representatives from mental health, the BRC, bereavement counsellors, hospitals and faith groups, among others. That's correct, is it?
Yes.
Have I summarised that correctly?
Yes.
Now, we know that just before the meeting, indeed at 13:56, Tony Andrews circulated the agenda and the terms of reference. Can we look at those? It's RBK 30020255. And there's the first page. Grenfell Tower Humanitarian Assistance Steering Group, terms of reference. And the agenda is there beneath it. Page 2 is the terms of reference. Do you know who drafted that? Tony Andrews circulated it, but do you know who drafted it?
I think this must be from the framework document.
Right. And it's drawn from Annex 1, but do you know whether, or did you have any input into it at all, or were you just given it?
This was a suggestion. No, he just gave me the terms of reference, yeah.
Right. Now, if we go then to page 2, we see it there, and you can see that the key responsibilities are set out in paragraphs 1 through to 7 there. I won't read them all to you, but one of them is, the first one is ensuring that the needs of affected people are understood and met. And then particularly 4, initiating consultation with communities and individual to ensure the response is effective. And 5, ensuring effective promotion of services to affected people and ensuring that effective pathways exist to enable people to find the support they require. And 6 is about sharing information, and 7, financial control. Now, I haven't read it all out to you, but it's obviously all there for people to see. If we look then at Tony Andrews' email, that under cover of which this document was sent to you, among others, this is at RBK 3020254. As you can see, it's from him at 1356, copied to a large number of people, including you, as one of the last, in fact, the last copy E. Dear all, for those of you dialing in today, the agenda and terms of reference are here. Is this the first time you'd seen the terms of reference for the HASG?
No, I think Tony and I met quite a lot that morning. I must have seen them before. And I read the framework, so they would have been in there, and we agreed the agenda together.
Right, I see. How prepared did you feel to chair that meeting?
I felt that agenda was massive. I felt I could coordinate a meeting. I could chair a meeting. I could coordinate a meeting. What was obvious to me was that there was so much there and there was so much happening that group had. It was just a massive agenda.
Right. And let's go back then to the agenda, which is page 1, I think, of... if we go back to page 1 of this document, there it is. We can see the extent of the agenda there that you describe as massive. And it has things in it so that everybody can see. Overview of welfare needs, support to be provided, community assistance centre, helpline, management of donations, and then underneath that, requirements for mutual aid from neighbouring local authorities and other agencies. Had you discussed that specifically during the course of the morning with Tony Andrews?
No.
Right. What was the process whereby this agenda was put together between you and Tony Andrews?
This is the agenda. He said, this is, again, a framework document agenda.
I see. So you just read the framework document, noted the existence of a pro forma agenda like this, and so you were ready for it when it came?
Yeah, Tony said, this is the agenda. Right. It might be massive. You might not get onto all those things.
I see.
We did have... Sorry. I'll wait.
Did you understand that in order to achieve the first of the key roles, if we go to page 2, we can see the terms of reference. Item 1, ensuring that the needs of affected people are understood and met. Did you understand that humanitarian impact assessments were required to be completed by agencies in attendance at the HASG?
Yes.
You did. Were there any problems in receiving those impact assessments promptly?
Yes.
And what were those problems?
I can't remember in detail, but I do remember we had to go out to several people there about filling them in. I don't think anyone had seen them. I think the problem was the same people that were at that group were doing all these other things. And in terms of this group, the status, the authority of it, the actual importance of it wasn't understood by everyone.
When did you get the impact assessments?
Well, they came in, they had to be changed daily, so I can't remember when. They were updated very regularly, but I do know Tony had to actually ask lots of people, lots of times.
Right, I see. When they did come, were they helpful in aiding you in the discharge of your responsibilities as Halo to understand the needs of those affected?
Well, did I have 2 meetings as a Halo?
Yes.
And it was... The one from British Red Cross gave numbers and issues that were going on, but we didn't get the rest till the next day. And they were just updates of how many people had housing and stuff. It was just quite overwhelming.
Now, can I show you something from Mike Robinson, who was the Director of Public Health at Westminster City Council? He gave us a statement at RBK 3035336. If we can go to that, please. There is the first page. Can we turn in it, please, to page 6, paragraph 29? This is what he says. He says the PHIT sought to collate information about the survivors. We requested lists from different actors involved in the recovery effort, such as housing officers, rest centre managers and the police. This was planned to be part of the HIA. We wanted the HASG/HRG to possess the most accurate information possible. Eva Hrobanova drafted the report. The following week I reviewed it and signed it off. However, before it was circulated, we required the RBKC Gold permission. This led to some delay, I presume because the Gold Group had concerns about releasing information. The summary HIA was released the following week commencing 19th June 2017. Was it the case that there was a delay in the circulation of these impact assessments, as he identifies there?
I have no knowledge of that because I wasn't. We tasked the public health at EVA to actually bring together all those impact assessments that I was asking for. This was a week later and I wasn't leading it. I have no idea what... They came to the...
Right.
The ones that were done came to the humanitarian assistance group, so they weren't delayed.
I see.
She was collating them to get a better assessment of what the needs were going forward. That's the report she was collating for the following week, and I don't know where that went.
I see. So is this right? These were for a more medium-term humanitarian response rather than the immediate short-term response?
Yes, more because people were filling these in, and she was collating them, and it took her a long time in terms of getting them back from people. But also, she was collating them to give us what do we need going forward.
And what did you at the time? This is early afternoon on the 15th of June. What did you consider to be the most pressing issue for the HASG?
Well, when I went into the meeting, in terms of advice and discussions, it was to set up. It was to look at whether we needed a humanitarian assistance centre, and that was something that would be set up the next day or the day after, a bit longer term, where you would have all the services that people might need in one place. That was the ambition for, and that was. I thought that was the main consideration of that. Right. Action.
Is that how you saw your role as Halo as well? Or did you see your role as Halo as involving more immediate and pressing humanitarian concerns?
I didn't when I originally read it, but because all sorts of things weren't happening, we were talking about setting up... I did see my role as doing that longer term, that humanitarian assistance centre. That was what I was told had to come out of that meeting. You know, that's what we had to get on and do.
Right.
A bit more... It's not medium, it's like 2 days later or something.
Let's then look at the minutes again, please. And I just want to ask you one or two questions about locations and rest centres. Again, can we go, please, back to the HASG minute at RBK 401920? I say back to the minutes. We haven't actually seen these yet, but certainly back to the meeting. Here is a set of the minutes. Humanitarian Assistance Steering Group, HASG, 15th June 2017 at 2 p.m. SR welcomed everyone and asked TA to summarise the purpose of the Humanitarian Assistance Steering Group. First, do you remember do you know who took these minutes?
Yes, it was my PA.
Your PA. And did you circulate the minutes to everybody who had come to the meeting?
Yes.
If we look at page 1 and we look at the third paragraph from the bottom of the page, scrolling down to that, please, it says, the council's efforts are at Westway as a council-run rest centre. Other informal rest centres may continue, but they will not be resourced with council services. Why was a decision made not to support the other rest centres in the local community?
I don't know when that decision was made. I think there was discussion about how everyone needed to consolidate into one rest centre.
When When was that decision made?
Well, I don't know when it was made. By the time we had this meeting, I think Tony Redpath said this was what was happening.
Right. Were you aware at this time that places such as the Rugby Portobello Trust and the Clement James Centre were being accessed and used by many of the bereaved and survivors?
Yes, yeah.
Did you receive any feedback that those affected by the fire were not in fact accessing the services available at the Westway?
I think I remember there was a discussion about not many people were going to be directed to Westway. There weren't very many people there, but the figures were getting higher, and so people were going to Westway.
Yes, and let's go to page 3 and we pick that up. Page 3, second paragraph from the bottom. You are recorded as saying, SR explained that the Westway Rest Centre has not had huge numbers of residents, but the numbers are increasing there. Is that what you're referring to?
Yes.
Yes. And if you also look at page 4 of the minute, there's an issue raised, it seems, by Emma Bragg. If you go to page 4, it says in the second paragraph, TG explained there might be others at this venue, such as neighbours, extended families who will be displaced for some time, and those who want support. More work is needed to clarify how all needs can be accommodated. And then next steps would involve TA helping to find, as Tony Andrews, helping to find a venue and coordinate accordingly. Subgroups will be formed, and TA is leading along with Council, Red Cross, health partners and the services. Community cohesion of faith groups are doing great things and should be involved. Red Cross to contact faith groups. What was the source of the information that the Westway, as you put it the previous page, had not had a huge number of residents, but numbers were increasing?
It must have been someone from the meeting who was feeding that back to us.
Given what we've seen in the terms of reference for the HASG, which included initiating consultation with communities and individuals, do you remember, was there any action taken to determine the cause of the lower than expected numbers at the Westway?
At that time, I think people were, because it had only just been allocated as the main rest centre. So that's what people thought. Once people knew about it, they would go there.
Yes. Although the need for one centralised official rest centre appears to be recognised here, do you remember whether people discussed the need for support to the other locations?
I think in this conversation, and these minutes, because, and this is why I said it's my PA rather than someone who's an expert at recording these meetings, this conversation, and certainly about a TA, Tony Andrews, and was about forming that one centre where council services and other services will be in. So I think these emails are conflating maybe a rest centre with a humanitarian assistance centre, and using the same vocabulary, because what we were talking about there was a need for something very soon where council services and other services could be to give support to people.
I see.
This is talking about the community, the humanitarian assistance centre.
Not rest centres per se.
That's my understanding of this discussion.
Right. Was that an understanding you had at the time? Let me try this differently. You're pausing because it may be a difficult question. At the time, on the 15th of June, did you understand there to be a distinction drawn in the London resilience arrangements between a rest centre and a humanitarian assistance centre?
I did.
You did. And what was that distinction?
The rest centres were the immediate ones set up by the BEC and staffed by rest centre managers and managed through Gold, and that's what was happening in my view. This one was the role that the humanitarian assistance group, which I was told and supported that we weren't dealing with the issues, the immediate issues. This was about setting something up for a day or two once a suitable venue would be found where people could come for all the advice and emotional support they needed in the one place.
I follow. And is it your evidence, and just assist us clarify it, that at the time on the 15th, you observed that there was some confusion in the minds of those at RBKC between the rest centre on the one hand and what you were intending to do by way of establishment of a humanitarian assistance centre on the other?
I think there probably was. Language was used for different things, and certainly my PA didn't understand it when she's writing this as well.
Right, I see. Let's then examine together the numbers displaced. Can we go to page 1 of these minutes, please, and look at the 4th paragraph down? Now, there you can see it says, T.R. Beck, representative, explained, that's Tony Redpath, that the council efforts are with the residents who've been displaced to ensure that they are comfortable and have accommodation moving forward. There are 77 people in hotels, with 25 people in the Westway Sports Centre, which is the only remaining council rest centre. Council resources and police presence are at Westway. If council assistance is needed, then Westway is where residents are to go. There have been a mountain of donations, transit lorries arriving from across the country. This is a major logistical effort to get all sorted and distributed. And if we go over the page, please, to page 2, the 3rd paragraph down on in the context of numbers, it says AG, that could be Amanda Gill, Housing explained that there are 79 households in commercial local hotels, there are under 30 households in temporary accommodation, and some are in hospitals as delayed discharges because of the accommodation problem. Can you explain the differences in the information being provided? The Beck here saying that 77 people were in hotels, and the housing department saying that there were 79 households in hotels, plus 30 more households in temporary accommodation. That's 109 households in all. Can you explain the discrepancy in the numbers? No?
I can't.
You can't. I mean, would you agree, not just in relation to the ordinary use of language, but at the time there was a difference between persons and households being more than one person, usually?
I don't know, that's how housing saw it. They might have seen one individual could have been a household because they'd had a house.
Was there a problem with terminology when the information was circulated about the number of those adversely affected by the fire?
I think there was quite a lot of problem with terminology generally, yeah.
Right. Now going back, please, to page 2, 3rd paragraph down again, which starts AG as we've seen. It goes on in the 3rd line, people temporarily evacuated from neighbouring properties are not a priority for temporary accommodation unless they are vulnerable. This is due to the shortage of temporary accommodation and the need to prioritise the residents of Grenfell Tower. Residents placed in hotels are visited to check their immediate practical needs. People have lost their IDs, so we are ensuring they have money and other needs met. First of all, was it the case that those evacuated from neighbouring properties, so the walkways, were not a priority for temporary accommodation unless they were vulnerable? Is that right?
Well, I only know that because it's written here.
Right. But you don't remember a separate discussion about it?
No, I wouldn't have been party to a separate discussion about the housing issues.
Right. And what was the information that you received about the number of evacuated persons from neighbouring properties who were affected by the fire? What kind of numbers are we dealing with? Do you remember?
Only from these notes,
Right.
I can't remember.
Well, on the notes, if you go 3 paragraphs on, if we scroll down, please, it says the plan. You see, it says the plan is to accommodate residents as locally as possible. And then it goes on. There are 450 people in cordoned off area who are still awaiting details of when they are allowed back into their homes. A lot of utilities to supply heating and water are under Grenfell, which have been affected. It will take 2 weeks or longer if housing is sorted. The Red Cross explained that the Air Hotel have offered free accommodation. Now, do you remember the cordoned off area included homes on Grenfell Walk, Hurstway Walk, Testerton Walk, Barrendon Walk, and Treadgold House? Do you remember that?
Well, I know those names.
Would you agree that that was a substantial number of people evacuated who were not placed in hotel or temporary accommodation at that stage?
Yes.
Yes. And it looks as if, from this minute, that at that stage it was well known that there were problems with the loss of utilities such as heating and water supply.
Yes.
Yes. What was the expectation in the light of those facts about what was going to happen to those evacuees from the cordoned off area in the forthcoming days?
Well, this is the first meeting, and this is an update from every aspect of people who came to that meeting. This is an update. After this, as a consequence of this meeting, we set up subgroups, and one of which was housing. And each of those subgroups, it's not really reflected in here what we said, each of those subgroups was to take these issues and to deal with them and come back and report back what they were doing on everything. And the housing group were taking forward these things.
Right. But what was the expectation? I just want to make sure I answer my question. What did you expect would happen to the evacuees from the cordoned off area, particularly given the numbers that are being discussed?
Well, at that time, I didn't have an expectation. I was the housing subgroup were going to have a look at that, and Gold Command were looking at that as well.
I see. So did you think that lay outside your role as Halo?
In terms of me doing anything about that immediately, what we were showing is this is a huge issue that's happening, and we need to set up a task group now. So that task group was set up then,
right,
to take forward these things and to report back.
Now, the minute continues, as we've seen it. If you go back up the screen, you could see in the last two lines of the paragraph that starts AG Housing that residents were placed in hotels and had lost their IDs. Were you satisfied at that stage that the needs, the humanitarian needs of those in hotels were being met?
Well, no, they weren't, because they needed so much more.
Oh, and did there come a time when that changed?
You mean, are we just talking about the first 3 days? You mean in the first 3 days?
Yes. Well, no, you start on the 15th of June.
Yeah.
With the observation that there are residents in hotels who needed money and other needs met because they not at least lost their IDs. Did that improve in the coming days?
I think the action from this was the housing staff were, again, this was a huge issue with the housing subgroup. The housing staff were going to visit people and making sure they had the money and their needs met. That was the action. Obviously, that was too overwhelming. So by the Saturday or the Sunday, we asked when other resources kicked in, we got key workers.
Right.
And I don't know how much improved after that, because there's been mixed views of that, but.
And you say it was too overwhelming. Just help me a little bit more. What was overwhelming about it?
When I said that was?
Yes. You said in the last answer that the housing staff were going to visit people and making sure they had the money and their needs met. That was the action. Obviously, that was too overwhelming. What was the problem?
I don't know how many housing staff, whether they knew where people were, what hotels they were in. They did have lists of that, but they said they had problems finding people in their hotels, and they said people weren't there. I don't know how they managed that process, but after that, and there might not have been enough of them. This sounds, it's like everyone's got a certain task to do, and it wasn't like that. People were just running around and trying their best. I'm sure you've got the housing lead talking tomorrow. I don't know exactly what they did.
And if we go on to page 3 again and look at the 6th paragraph this time in this minute, it's about the middle of your screen. well, it's 2/3 of the way down your screen. It says, there is a need, agree ways of sharing information so that residents can be tracked and their needs met. There is a governmental group looking at this. Who was the governmental group referred to here who was looking at this?
Well, this would have been said by either Tony Redpath or someone we had at that meeting from central government, and my PA hasn't put the detail down, so I can't remember what.
Right.
This is indicative of why you need logists and people taking notes that understand the process.
And did you expect, or had you expected, that a procedure for sharing information should have been put in place before the fire so that this discussion wouldn't have to happen after the fire?
Sorry, sharing information before the fire?
Well,
Sorry,
it says there is a need to agree ways of sharing information so that residents can be tracked and their needs met. Let me try it slightly differently. Did you expect that there would be an already established mechanism for sharing information such as that for that purpose?
I know we shared information, so in terms of my own area, adults social care shared information with health, so we had combined records, and we would have known people who'd been in housing need.
Right.
But other than that, I don't know.
You don't know. Do you know what steps were taken after this meeting to agree on a way of sharing information as identified there in the minute?
No.
Now, the minutes touch on the topic of donations from the public, and we've seen reference here to the mountain of donations with transit lorries arriving from across the country. We saw that on page 1. What impact do you recall the volume of donations had, if any, on RBKC's activities and the response?
Well, they hardly had anyone to deal with them. So again, it was there were so many of them, and we did Debbie Morris became the person again in this subgroup who was to take that forward. But there were very few staff to be able to deal with it. There were not enough staff to deal with it. There were so many donations outside.
Right. Does that tell us that there was no pre-existing plan to deal with donations and their distribution?
Well, there probably was something in the plan, but in reality, it didn't.
Right.
It didn't materialise.
They say in the plan, but there was right. So is this right? Whatever there was, it didn't materialise.
It didn't materialise, both because there was so many, but also I don't know whether there was a designated lead to do that, or they had a preparedness for that.
Right. Now, if we stick with the minutes and go to page 4, please. Third paragraph from the bottom. We can see it says MR. You see, it says MR to lead the health and wellbeing subgroup, which will include ASC, children's services and mental health. MR to feed back to HAB. LP and JW to co-chair the subgroup with MR. Now, MR is Michael Robinson, yes?
Yes.
And he was the Director of Public Health at Westminster City Council, yes?
Yes.
And if we look at his statement at RBK 3035336, if you go, please, to page 5, paragraph 25, at the foot of that page, 4 lines up from the bottom of page 5, he says, you need to go to page 6, actually, for the bit I want. We agreed 4 lines up. We concluded that there was little point of duplicating efforts and resources. We agreed that the HRG would take the lead and we would convene our own subgroup if necessary later on. I cannot recall how many HASG meetings I attended, but I was present at the initial meetings on 15th and 16th of June. You see that? And then he goes on to say, in the next paragraph, he attended the first meeting on 15th of June. Thereafter, Cynthia Folerin took the lead and reported to me. Discussions were fed back. And then he says at paragraph 27, the DPH did not have power to mobilise any further resources on the ground. We ourselves did not deliver any services to the community. Instead, RBKC entered into contracts with the local NHS trusts, such as the CLCH, to deliver services. Throughout the first week, we were in contact with the CLCH to ensure that those services were provided properly. For instance, we knew there would be many traumatised children, and so we ensured that our health visitors and school nurses would prioritise work in the vicinity. Is that correct? Does that correspond with your own recollection?
Yes, when he says entered into contracts, if he's talking about this response, they were part of that response partners anyway, so they would have done it without a contract, but yes.
Yes. Now, if we go back to the minutes then, at page 2, there's a reference there in the last paragraph on page 2 to the Manchester Step pathway, as you can see there from the second line, yes?
Yeah.
Could you explain what that was?
I can't in detail, but basically this is about saying what is the route for people who've been traumatised or through something like this. And it was saying the first 2 days or 3 weeks, this happens, 5 weeks, 6 weeks later, this happens, then you do an assessment, and it goes through different stages of what sort of response in terms of mental health support you should give survivors.
Right. Now, in relation to publicising those services, at the bottom of page 2, just a little lower down, you can see it says, NHS have a general leaflet and a consistent message is needed from health and other partners that can be used. This will be very helpful, so this can be advertised. Can you help us with what was envisaged with the entry? If you go to the top of page 3, you can see there. MR, Director of Public Health, to promote communications and work with the Council communications with the leaflets. Psychology services are aware of this, so will link into those they're working with. What was envisaged?
This was about letting people know in wherever they were that there's a range of help they could access and the details of it and the phone numbers.
Right. Now, did you know that the following day, 16th of June, the NHS partners were asking for the Council's website to be updated so that people affected by the Grenfell, either directly or indirectly and in need of mental health support or psychological therapy, could call a dedicated NHS response line?
I don't recall.
Do you know anything about that?
I know, but this would have been part of this to make sure it was on the website.
Right.
They would have been doing that as part of these actions.
Right. Do you know who was coordinating that effort with RBKC?
Within RBKC?
Well, either within or with.
It would have been someone. It would have been maybe Louise Proctor or someone from
Right.
CCG.
Did you know anything about that at this time? It's discussed here at the meeting, but did you know anything about it beyond the proposal set out here in the
I can't
minutes?
remember. No.
Right. Sticking with the topic of communications, we've seen that one of the matters set out in the terms of reference for the HASG was to ensure effective promotion of services to affected people and ensuring that effective pathways exist to enable people to find the support they require. We saw that as one of the terms of reference. Were communications to those affected by the fire identified as a problem at this meeting? Do you remember?
I can't remember. But I do know communications were a problem.
Right. And what aspect of communications do you remember being a problem?
Things like staff on the front, on the ground, maybe not always knowing how to access cash or where to refer people, where people should go to for advice about loved ones. There were those sorts of things, a range of those.
And who was reporting that back to you?
I don't know whether anyone said it at this meeting, but certainly I must have got it from Gold or from other places.
Let's see if we can pin this down a bit more closely. Can we go to page 5 of this minute, please? Top of the page. top of your screen, a communications subgroup will be needed. Criticism and questions have been asked around the communications. SR is going to gold meeting now, so communications will be an integral part of the discussions. Just looking at that, does it provoke a recollection? What were the criticisms and questions asked around communications?
Well, what I've said, and just that people didn't know where to go, and people weren't being told what was happening, generally. And people on the ground, the staff on the ground, weren't informed.
Now, do you remember taking that to RBKC Gold at the next Gold meeting?
I don't remember going to Gold, but I do remember going to Tony Redpath, and because he managed all the internal services, and asking him what was going on about comms, and we needed to get a message out. And I think I did mention it at Gold. I don't think it's in the minutes, but I did mention it. And he told me that the media and comms were doing something. I don't know whether that's in the Gold meeting.
We'll come to the Gold meeting minutes in a moment and look at it. Before we do, let's look at some other people's evidence about the impressions they got about this meeting, the first HASG meeting. First, Emma Spragg, who attended, I think. BRC 6050 is her statement. And if we go, please, in it to page 15, paragraph 63, she says, in the fourth line down there, my impression of this meeting was that it could perhaps have been better organised, though I understood the extremely stressful and distressing situation everyone was involved in, especially the council staff. The meeting room was quite small. There were substantial numbers of individuals packed in. London resilience groups supported the meeting. First of all, her impressions of the meeting. What do you say about that? Do you agree?
Yeah, I agree with her.
And she says at paragraph 65, there was discussion about the provision of support and the roles different organisations at the site were performing in an attempt to identify gaps in the services being provided. Topics raised included numbers of households affected, accommodation and welfare needs. At this stage, there was still no confirmation of numbers affected, nor confirmation of where all the survivors were located, whether in temporary accommodation or rest centres. Do you agree with that?
Yes.
You do. Would you have been assisted by representatives from the voluntary organisations providing support at the unofficial rest centres being in attendance at this meeting?
I don't think they were in attendance. I don't think we had a representative. We might have had someone from the churches who was
right.
At the...
Were any efforts made, do you remember, to try to identify those organisations and invite them to this meeting?
Well, I actually asked Tony Redpath to do that.
Yes, and indeed it's in the framework document. Is that where you got the idea from?
Yes. And that came from the conversation I had with him about being the voluntary sector lead.
Yes. Let's then turn to the RBKC Gold meeting in the afternoon of the 15th of June 2017 at 15:30. Minutes are at RBK 401874, please. First attendees. We can see that you were in attendance there. Yes?
Yes.
And as was Tony Redpath and others. If we stick with page 1 and look at the fourth bullet point down, which says if the cordon is not lifted, it says, if the cordon is not lifted, then have over 800 people to find places, will need to seek help from government. Do you remember where the number of 800 came from?
No.
Now, those numbers were, as is obvious, much greater than the 450 people that had been noted in your meeting of the HASG some 90 minutes earlier. Are you able to explain the difference?
I'm not.
Did you query the numbers at the time?
No, I didn't. I didn't.
Was it not of interest to you to know even roughly how many people were adversely affected by the fire which would be requiring, or who would be requiring humanitarian assistance or some kind of help from RBKC?
I would probably have asked afterward. I didn't ask at the time at this Gold meeting.
Right. Why is that?
I've the goal meet. I just been from. I'd just had our meeting yet. We just had the housing the Humanitarian Assistance Steering Group meeting, and I'd just come into this, and I just felt there wasn't. Every meeting was doing the same thing. Every meeting was just hearing these same things, and I didn't know where the role I had fitted in with this, and how I could possibly take all those things forward and understand everything at that time. And I didn't even, think to ask about those two figures, no, because I was really concentrating on a centre and getting some things moving specifically. So I didn't ask about the difference.
Right, you didn't. Did you have confidence in the accuracy of the information being provided, given the discrepancy in the numbers
that
are being thrown around? You didn't have any confidence. What did you understand by the reference to the need to seek help from the government?
I don't know what that's referring to.
Was there any discussion at that point, 3:30 in the afternoon of the 15th of June, regarding the activation of the Gold Protocol for London Local Authority Gold, LLAG?
I didn't hear anything.
Right. Were you aware of the structure and the ability to invoke London Gold Resolution?
I'm not sure whether specifically, but I didn't know the council had to ask. I didn't know the specifics of that.
Right. If we go to page 3 of this document, these minutes of this meeting, second bullet point down, or first bullet point on the page, CC feedback that comms was not seen to be working and that the council was not visible enough. Schools are not able to get in touch with the press office and need help to manage comms. Comms team can draft an internal memo for staff from the leader. Do you know who raised that at the meeting?
Yeah, that's Claire Chamberlain.
Claire Chamberlain. And what was done, do you know, about that?
I think at that time as well, some of us said there are other issues, there are real issues with comms, and there was a comms person there who was supposed to take that forward.
Right. And if we go, please, to page, we'll stick with this page and look at the next item down, the second item down, Humanitarian Assistance Steering Group update. You give the report there, yes?
Yes.
And in the second bullet point, you report that you'd made a request to Beck for a full-time administrator support officer and a key person who knows networks and contacts in council. Did you receive that support?
This is where I think Mark Sawyer comes in for a bit of this question, because he came up to me afterwards and asked me what the issues were. The next morning, there was someone that he sent along to start taking the notes and being an administrative support who understood all the processes. I didn't get a key person who knows network contacts in council, so I had to just go and ask anyone who I could what to do about this and what to do about it.
Right. We may come to that, but don't just show you the email, just to see if we can put this in its context. RBK30 is 27850. This is an email almost exactly a day later, 16th of June, since you refer to it. And it's an email from Toby Gould at London Fire to Deborah Collins and you. Deborah Sue, I took a decision to seek mutual aid from other local authorities to provide secretariat support around the HASG meetings over the weekend. We needed to put the request out ASAP to have a better chance of a positive response. I didn't think you'd object, but please shout if any problems, etc. And then he goes on, I'll be here, but we'll lead that function, but we are running short on our own staff and or our volunteers to support. If RBKC can assist, it would be very useful to have someone around who can also provide contact details, etc., etc. Is that what you're referring to?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. And then going back, if we can, to the minute, please. RBK40 is 1874, page 3, under the heading of Forward Look, after your report from the HASG and the MassFat steering group. Forward Look, internal staffing, and NA said, that's Nick Austin, said that the WSC, that's Westway Support Centre, need a senior manager and a rest centre manager at WSC. Beck working on rota for rest centre manager. Senior officers thin on ground, but we'll think about this. Two things. First, was that a matter of concern to you or others at the meeting? When I say that, what I mean is the staffing problem identified there.
Well, I think it was raised as a concern, and then someone was going to action it. I don't know whether it was then. I said, I'm not in that meeting, but I said, I'll go. I was told not to. Yeah.
Right. Now, this is obviously in the context, I say obviously. Do you remember whether this was in the context of the Westway Centre being a rest centre, or whether it was in its context of being a humanitarian assistance centre?
It was as a rest centre.
What was the WSC at this point? Was it a rest centre?
It was a rest centre, and it wasn't going to be, at that time, no one envisaged it would be the longer term. It turned out to become the longer term.
I follow. And when did discussions about WSC becoming the longer term humanitarian assistance centre start?
Well, I think there was an action that we needed one, so that was obvious. And then someone from RBKC, I forget who it was, who was in charge of buildings, he was tasked with finding, well, with me, he was tasked with finding a suitable premises that could be a longer term, medium term. And that was started on the Friday, Thursday or Friday, maybe Thursday.
Yes, and I think we come back to that in due course in your evidence. So we'll park that for the moment. I just want to ask you a question or two about helplines for residents. If we go back a page, please, in these minutes to page 2, you can see on page 2 under the second bullet point it says Red Cross can help set up a helpline, KB and SR to take forward. Now, in your second statement, you say, paragraph 11.1 on page 8, that you wanted to see whether it was possible to run a dedicated joint helpline with the BRC. Why did you consider a joint helpline in particular was needed?
I don't think that was my advice. And I think Red Cross, wanted the council, to do a helpline. Red Cross had one up and running. And I think they advised that you could join them both together. So I tried to find someone in the council who would be able to do that.
Was the problem that at this point, in the absence of a dedicated response helpline, the RBKC's housing line was what was being publicised as the number to call?
I think it might have been. I can't.
Well, let's just put this in.
Can't remember.
Context, if we can. MOL 6014. This is the SCG 0830 meeting on the 14th of June. So this is a day before. Picking it up at page 3, paragraph 6. If you look at the heading, local authorities provided an update. Third bullet point, RBKC housing line is available for displaced people. Was that what you understood was the position going into the 15th of June and remaining the position as at 15:30 on the 15th of June?
Yes.
Yes. Now, you, I think, then liaised with RBKC customer services during the evening of the 15th of June about setting up a helpline with the support of the Red Cross. Is that right?
Yes.
And you raised that again, I think, the next day, 16th of June, at the second HASG meeting. We can see that at RBK 402040. Page 1. Now we've jumped ahead to the next day, but just pursuing this helpline question. Under 3, Chair, it says, clarify with RBKC Gold whether the helpline, emotional support, access to funds, links to other services available for this incident should be run by RBKC or the BRC. BRC helpline is up and running 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. And then it goes on. BRC RBKC, Mr. Westbrook, stroke call centre to consider linking helpline to a hunt group, also staffed by RBKC. First, what was a hunt group? Do you know?
I think where you chase, a call goes to someone else directly.
Right.
Chase.
And what was the outcome of those inquiries that are identified in that box there?
I think the issue here was British Red Cross had a call up, helpline up and running, but the council weren't providing them with the information. You know, they didn't feel it was all their responsibility to have the helpline. So they wanted us to talk with RBKC about it. And the outcome of this, I think, was that there were some problems doing the join up. And so I think RBKC said they could set one up, but they took a while to do it. And I didn't think, I wanted to ask British Red Cross what they thought about it, so I went back to them.
Right. Now, I think you say in your second statement, and it's paragraph 111, that on reflection, you don't think you ever managed to coordinate the two helplines before London Gold stepped in.
No, because this was Friday lunchtime, and they stepped in
Yes.
Friday afternoon.
Yes. Would it have helped to have had a dedicated helpline?
Oh, I'm sure it would.
As quickly as possible.
I'm sure it would.
And was it the position, so far as you recall it, that there were these two helplines operating separately and independently, RBKC's housing line on the one hand and the British Red Cross helpline on the other?
Yes, I think so.
Right. Now, I think it's right that the helpline that was eventually used was the phone number that had been set up by the British Red Cross in response to the Manchester Arena incident, which had occurred on the 22nd of May 2017. Is that your recollection?
Immediately it was. I don't know whether that stayed that way, but yeah.
Yes. And do you remember that on the 17th of June, that's the Saturday, there was a brief meeting of the Community Assistance Centre, the CAC subgroup at 1 o'clock, and Tony Andrews circulated an action which was that a helpline number needs to be published immediately. Is that something you recall?
I wasn't there.
You weren't there, but do you recall the event? Do you recall the fact?
Yeah.
You do. And after that was set up, were there problems still relating to the number not being published, or did those disappear?
There were so many things in the days after, when we were in Westminster, that we had to deal with, and I'm sure the helpline would have been, the publicity around the helpline would have been one of them. I'm sure we were dealing with that.
Yeah, in fact, the records show that the BRC, British Red Cross helpline, was eventually set up on the 16th of June, the Friday. Did any problems arise while it was active, do you remember?
I think there were some questions about the information that the staff had to hand and what they knew.
Let's then turn to the 16th of June and start with the RBKC Gold meeting on that day at 10 o'clock. You say that you attended that meeting. That's paragraph 41 of your first statement at page 9. We don't need to see that, but that's right, is it? You attended?
Yes.
Yes. Now, you mentioned in your statement that John Barradell was present at that meeting. You say that at paragraph 41. That he was the town clerk at the City of London and also the chair of the local authorities panel. What did you understand his role to be in this incident?
I didn't know at that time. I just knew we had some people who hadn't been to previous meetings. I had hoped they were there to help. Right.
Now, let's go to your statement then at page 9, first statement, page 9, paragraph 41. You say there in the middle, I think Nicholas Holgate chaired the meeting. The next meeting was at 1500 hours, and at the end of the meeting, John Barradell said that the next meeting was by invitation only. Although it was never expressly said, from this I took it to mean that London Resilience were now taking over control. London Resilience is there to provide support and mutual aid in a crisis situation. First, was it said, or what you remember John Barradell saying, that the next meeting was by invitation, something that he said at the 10 o'clock meeting or at the end of the 1500 hours meeting?
In my recollection, it was the end of the 1500 hours.
I see. Right. And I think you say you took it to mean that London Resilience was now taking over control, as you say. Was there a discussion about London Local Authority Gold taking over during the 10 o'clock meeting?
In my recollection, I don't remember anything like that. I just thought we had some people sitting there.
What do you mean, some people?
Well, people I didn't know who were in this meeting, and they didn't say anything about... they may have been introduced as London Gold,
I see.
But I had no recollection there was any talk about them taking over.
Right, let's go to RBK 30200703. These are the minutes of the 10 o'clock meeting on the 16th of June 2017. You can see who was present. You were present, as was Nicholas Holgate and a list of others. But you can also see, also in attendance, John Barradell. You see that?
Yes.
And also Alex Woodman, LLAC, and Mark Sawyer too. Now, if we go please in that to page 4, you'll see a heading, London Local Authority Gold, about a third of the way down your screen. And it says, JB outlined what he and his team would be doing, which is primarily to complement what we are doing and give us some respite. He praised the council for managing on their own for so long, but now was the time to get in help and support. Do you remember that?
I can't remember it as such, but I didn't read that as taking over or anything like that.
Right. Well, we may come back to that in a moment, but you can see, sticking with the minute, on page 3, if we go back, please, under item 5, key issues and strategic decisions, it says humanitarian assistance, including emergency rest centre, community assistance centre, offers of accommodation. It says there, TR assisting in identifying properties for a community assistance centre needs space with furniture, barriers and private rooms with provision to speak to liaison officers. You see that?
Yes.
What was, or what did you understand to be, a community assistance centre?
This is... I think he's doing this because he's a voluntary sector person and he's reporting back. This is what I'm calling the Humanitarian Assistance Centre. It's the same thing. It was a longer term thing that the group I was dealing with was looking at. Right, so you read this, or is this right? You understood Community Assistance Centre to be the same thing as a Humanitarian Assistance Centre? Yes. Right. Can I just show you then RBK 30133294? Now, this is the Major Incident Procedure Manual published by LESLP. Are you familiar with this or were you familiar with this document at the time? No. You weren't. Let's go to page 36, paragraph 9.11. And this is under the heading Community Assistance Centre. And it says, the local authority may decide to establish a Community Assistance Centre, CAC, to undertake a detailed community impact assessment, to provide advice and support to affected people, and to support the recovery of the community in a local setting. Community assistance centres may be considered particularly where a humanitarian assistance centre has not been activated. So, did you know that a community assistance centre was not the same as a humanitarian assistance centre? In fact, was what would happen where you didn't have a humanitarian assistance centre? I know that in terms of the work that was happening in RBKC, those two phrases were interchangeable. But for me, reading this, they're the same thing. We were calling it, at one point, even in our humanitarian assistance group, it was called the CAC meeting, and then it changed the HAC meeting. But in terms of what they were doing and what they were going to provide and what they needed in there, it was exactly the same thing.
Right. Now, at this point, 10 a.m., 16th of June 2017, what was the Westway Sports Centre classified as?
Sorry, what was the day? The Friday?
Yes, we're on the Friday and we're at 10 o'clock.
I still think that was a rest centre.
Right. And how advanced were efforts to locate a suitable location for a community assistance centre, or, if you like, a humanitarian assistance centre?
There were people in the council tasked with looking at all their accommodation, and I know that I forget his name, but the person who was in charge of it came back to us, to Tony Andrews, who was looking at this with him, to say he couldn't find any. He found one place which was discounted by everyone because it wasn't in the area, and then we put together some sort of a spec about what it should be, and the British Cross put together a list of things they needed, and then he had a better specification to go and apparently look for accommodation. He said he couldn't find any. So I just remember the conversations about the Westway where, look, we've got the Westway, and apparently, I can't recall, but the Westway wanted to open as a leisure centre again on the Monday. So the conversations where you can't close the Westway, it needs to stay open, and it needs to become this centre, even initially for the first few days or weeks until we find some proper place.
I see. Now, we can see in this minute, if we go to page 3, go back to the minute, page 3, this is RBK 3020703. If you go to page 3 in there, which was where we were before, the next bullet point says this: NH, it's highlighted in yellow on your screen, NH said we should continue to use WSC and asked RE and SR to identify a place by 12 noon today. This is to identify a place, is this right, for use as a community assistance centre?
Yes.
Yes. Was that a realistic request to identify a location for a CAC by 12 noon that day, within 2 hours?
No.
Did you tell him it wasn't a realistic request?
Well, at the time, my name's next to it, but it was RE, I forget his name. He had already looked at a list of places, so I didn't know whether he knew that he had somewhere. I mean, most councils would know, or you would hope you would know, if there was accommodation in your area which you could commandeer for that, or there's organisations you could speak to. So I thought he might have something in mind. But when I say by 12 noon today, and then what he came back with to say he couldn't find anything, I just thought the Westway seemed to be the place.
Now, was the position that a suitable alternative location wasn't identified, and that by the 17th of June Westway had transitioned into a CAC, or was it still a rest centre?
In my thoughts, it was transitioning, into a CAC. Right.
Let's see if we can just pin this down a little bit more accurately. RBK 3020788. This is a little bit later in the day. This is an email from Tony Andrews to Emma Spragg at the Red Cross, Rebecca Blackburn in the Beck, and also a number of others, including you. Dear all, many thanks for your contributions this afternoon. And this post dates the goal meeting that afternoon and the next HASG meeting. But underneath the words to confirm the actions agreed, it says Westway will be used as a temporary community assistance centre over the weekend, 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. So is it the case that at some point during the 16th, the decision was taken that the Westway would transition, at least temporarily, into a CAC?
Yes, it was.
Yes.
Someone had spoken to the Westway. We'd already set up the group that was looking at what needed to be done, and it was definitely agreed by the end of that day, and the services were going to be in place the next day.
Now, if we then stick with the topic, Westway, and stick with the date, 16th of June 2017, a little bit later in that day from this email, let's go to RBK30200821. This is an email on the 16th of June 2017 at 19:14. If we go to the bottom of page 1 of your screen, your email, of the email run there, it's from Toby Gould to Emma Spragg and you and Mark Sawyer, copy to Tony Andrews, Humanitarian Assistance Centre, comms, stroke information requirement and shopping list. You see that?
Yes.
And then if you turn the page to page 2, top of page 2, he says this: I know you are well aware of the community tensions and the urgent need for information for those affected. From what we're hearing, there are confused messages being given out on the ground with, for example, police and other RBKC query staff turning friends and family away from the Westway Centre and telling those with missing loved ones to call the Casualty Bureau instead. There is a concern that this is fueling community tensions and that turning people away is preventing them from getting the support they so need. I know work is ongoing to improve the communications, but as an interim measure, if clear messages could be given to the frontline staff across all responding agencies about what is available and where, that would be a good step forward. My question is, were you aware that this was a problem before you received this email? Confused messages being given out?
I don't recall knowing that.
You don't recall knowing that. So when you received this email, did what Toby Gould is saying here in the passage I've read to you come to you as a surprise?
I think I read this later than when he sent it, but it probably wasn't a surprise because it was transitioning and it wasn't. No one had said this will be a community assistance centre. I don't think comms hadn't gone out. I don't think to people. It was still people were still working on it. That's what I think.
Now, if we scroll to the top of page 1 in this email run, we can see that Tony Andrews then sent an email to the Beck email address, as you can see, copied to you and others, including Emma Spragg. And it says, to comms, and this is timed now at 2017 on the evening of the 16th of June, to comms, please see the message below about current confusion on the purpose of the centre at Westway and about the location of the Police Friends and Family Centre, resulting in distressed people being wrongly sent away. From tomorrow morning, Westway will be a temporary community assistance centre until we can set up a proper longer-term facility. There will be welfare, housing, health and psychological support available for anyone affected by the incident between 9 a.m. and 6 p.m. on Saturday and Sunday and onwards. Please ask the Beck to check with the police for the definite location of the Friends and Family Reception Centre so that can be included within the comms on all websites, including the new .gov website. Please also ask the Beck to clarify Westway's possible use as a rest centre so that this can also be clear in the same message. Please ensure that the managers of the centre are clear so that reception and security staff don't send people away wrongly. Now, focusing there on the request to ask the Beck to check with the police for the definite location of the Friends and Family Reception Centre, what did you understand that to be? That centre, what was that about?
That's where bereaved people who've been bereaved would go to find out from the police what was happening.
Right. So not Westway?
No.
And to your recollection, was it clear, was the communication clear, that if bereaved friends and family wanted information about their loved ones, then the Westway was not the place to go?
At that time, it wasn't clear where people would go.
Right. What, to your recollection, was the place where friends and family could go for news about their loved ones?
Well, over this time, I think there was a bit of confusion about this. One of the, there was another centre, I forget the name, where it was called at that time a family and friends and families reception centre in the locality. I forget what it was. But obviously, people were coming anywhere for it, so they might be coming to the Westway as well.
Why was there a lack of, or apparent lack of clarity about where the location of the Friends and Family Reception Centre was or was to be?
I can't answer that, but I do know that the work I did the next few days was all about looking at a friends and families reception centre somewhere else and setting it up properly. I don't know. I think the police set this up. I don't know where they set it up.
Did you know, or has anybody told you, that the Friends and Family Reception Centre had been moved on the evening, or by the evening of the 14th of June, to the Westway?
I didn't know that was formal. I can't recall that at all.
Right. Do you agree that it was a matter for some concern that even 2.5 days after the fire, there was still uncertainty about the location of support for those seeking support and information about their loved ones?
Yes.
And were you concerned about that at the time?
Because I didn't know everything, I didn't know there was this. I knew people were not knowing where to go properly. We were trying to get. Well, I was trying to get some comms messages out through the comms team. Yeah, absolutely concerned. And I didn't. When I went home the night and saw what was happening to people, it was horrendous. So that's why it was horrendous, and it was concerned.
Mr. Chairman, it's a little bit before 1 o'clock, but this would be a convenient moment. The next topic will take us well beyond 1 o'clock, and there's no immediate stopping point in it, which would be convenient. So it's now a convenient moment.
Well, in that case, we'd better stop now, hadn't
Yes,
we?
thank you.
We're going to stop now, Ms. Redmond, so we can all get some lunch. We'll resume, please, at 2 o'clock. And as I've asked you before, please don't talk to anyone about your evidence or anything relating to it while you're out of the room. All right?
Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Millett. 2 o'clock, please. Thank you.